Then we're going to open it up for Q&A. And I've prepared a few slides to set the context for the conversation. We're also going to turn off chat during the interview part, and then we'll open it. So just to get us started here, I'm going to share my slides. During the interview part, and then we'll open it. What happened? So just to get us started here. Cole, what happened?
Sorry, that was just playing back from my computer. I'll mute myself.
All right, so we are really excited to have Haggai Matar with us. He is the director of 972 magazine. He's an award-winning Israeli journalist, political activist, and the executive director of 972, which is interesting because it's a media outlet run by a group of Palestinians and Israelis. And he was a conscientious objector in 2002. In other words, not going into the Israeli army, and he spent 2 years in prison. The award that he got was for this piece, this 12-part series on The Wall, 10 Years On. That was in 2012. So just a few slides to set the context. We're going to start in Gaza. So I know you've all seen the photos. This photo is from January, and this is Rafah at the south of the Gaza Strip. These were the people returning north. I mean, you've seen the photos of just swarms of people heading back to the north. Their homes aren't there, but to the north. This was the first group of released Palestinian prisoners, I think, in the West Bank. These were, you've all seen this one, the 4 Israeli women soldiers released in January. So one of the reporters for 972 magazine, Tariq, posted this. A ceasefire won't stop Israel's genocidal agenda. The agreement may reduce the intensity of Israel's killing spree, but it's likely to usher in a grueling new phase of ethnic cleansing with Trump's full support. He wrote that on January 19th. What a surprise that that's exactly what President Trump said on February 4th at this. I know you've all seen the photos of President Trump and Netanyahu meeting. And he said, you know, he'd like Egypt and Jordan to take the Palestinians from Gaza, you know, 1.5 million people or so. We're going to own Gaza and, you know, we're going to turn it into the Riviera of the East. And then, as you know, what's been going on at the same time as this, not just during the ceasefire, but even before that, that there's been increased violence in the West Bank. So there were Al Jazeera's reporting 26,000 Palestinians displaced in the West Bank. This was bombing Jenin. And I know this audience is familiar with Gidon Levy and Wayne Rabbani, who said Netanyahu will do everything possible to kill the deal later. And I read that on February 4th, the Hamas spokesman said they have started on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal, because we all, you know, we weren't sure if that was going to happen. So with that context, the question for you, Haggai, is what is your sense of how this will play out?
Thank you for that introduction, Abby, and for having me. And hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I think first of all, really just acknowledging how bad things have been. I mean, you've kind of reviewed the past couple of weeks, but really in the context of the past 16 months, it's been absolutely horrific, and so much death and destruction, and both the massacre of October 7th and everything that has happened since in Gaza, just the ongoing massacre there. And in that sense, there's so much hope in this process in many ways to me. The ceasefire is something we've been campaigning for, we've been wanting to see for so long. Seeing hostages released, seeing prisoners released, and then just not being any more bloodshed in Gaza is such a relief. Seeing people go home is such a relief. And at the same time, there's just so much despair and pain that comes with it. People coming home and seeing that there's just absolutely nothing left. We've had reporters going back to their homes in the north of Gaza, finding out not only that they can't find their house because it's been destroyed, but they can't identify where their house was because the entire neighborhood no longer exists. So you don't even have anything to use as coordinates to understand, oh, this is where my house used to be because this is my street. There's no street anymore. That and this condition in which both Palestinian prisoners and today also Israeli hostages are released is absolutely horrific and painful to watch in terms of how people have been treated in Israeli prisons and by Hamas in the tunnels. So this hope is really intertwined with a lot of despair. And the question of where it all is leading and how it'll play out, I think it's really very much up to Trump. And I think anyone who knows anything about anything would know not to guarantee what Trump is planning. I don't think he necessarily knows what he's planning. And I think it's really up to him. I do agree with that quote you shared before. Netanyahu definitely has an interest to end the ceasefire. We heard him talk about this with President Trump in the press conference when he said, we still have our goal of defeating Hamas and making sure that there's no threat to Israel from Gaza. That doesn't coincide with a prolonged ceasefire, phases 2 and 3, Israel pulling out of all of Gaza, Hamas basically continuing to run Gaza. It just doesn't work. So both because of that goal of his and his coalition partners, he would want to continue to go back to the actual war and ethnic cleansing and everything that was happening before. That's what he wants. There's a world in which Trump just says no. And then what we've been seeing in the West Bank is kind of his government's way to make up for that, and the Trump's declarations about the future of Gaza being basically emptied of Palestinians, that those kind of promises for sometime in the future and what's been happening in the West Bank, the ongoing attacks and kind of the Gazification of the West Bank in terms of really severe attacks, airstrikes destroying entire buildings in ways that we have not seen since 2002 in the West Bank, and it's much more akin to what we've been seeing in Gaza, that all of that is a way to make up for the failure, essentially, to continue the war in Gaza and to beat Hamas in Gaza.
Right. And so what you said was interesting because Netanyahu still has the goal of, quote, getting rid of Hamas. So there's an imperative to go back there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely what he says. It's one of the stated goals of the war when the government announced the war back in October of 23. Defeating Hamas was one of the goals that the government set forth, and he's saying, this is still a goal. I think a lot of commentators, even here in Israel, have been saying, if that's what you want, you've not been, not only have you not been successful, you've not actually been doing anything to promote that solution, because the lack of an alternative to Hamas is actually the real goal for Netanyahu and his allies. They've been saying for many, many years that Hamas is the best asset that Israel can have because it's such a demon that can be used. It's not the PLO, it's not the Palestinian Authority, and in its extremism and fundamentalism, it's really easy to point to and say, we can't have peace with these people. We need to continue oppressing Palestinians forever. We need to control their land forever, because if not, we'll have, an entire state, a Palestinian state that is run by Hamas and will, commit October 7th massacres again and again and again. That's what he wants to show Israelis, which is why he's not interested in actually beating Hamas. He's interested in forever fighting Hamas, but not beating it. And the fact that he has not looked for an alternative, such as negotiating with the PLO for a long-term solution that will include both Gaza and the West Bank, is because he wants the Hamas to regain power, as we have seen it do over the past few weeks of the ceasefire.
Mhm. That's a very useful framing for us to have, I must say, that he doesn't have, it's useful for him to continue to have Hamas being there, and he doesn't want them replaced for that reason.
Yeah, and I think vice versa. I think Hamas is also built on what Netanyahu is doing when Israel is not showing any inclination to end apartheid, to end oppression of Palestinians, when the stated goals of both Israel and now apparently the US is just ethnic cleansing, then people will turn to Hamas, because what's the point of supporting anyone who supports negotiations and a peaceful solution if the other side is saying we're just trying to destroy you? So both sides are really gaining from this. Not that there's equilibrium between them. Obviously, Israel is much more responsible as the sole the authority or power in this country. But still, they definitely are building off each other.
Right. So this is happening in a larger context of the countries around the Middle East. And so let's talk for a minute about Lebanon and Syria. The Israeli army and the Lebanon and Hezbollah have been firing rockets at each other. Israel killed Ismail Haniyeh and Hassan Nasrallah. Hezbollah has fired northern Israel. The Israelis from northern Israel have fled south. Israel continues to attack that until they came to a ceasefire. And then the Lebanese were supposedly allowed to return to southern Lebanon. Question about whether that's happening. And then Bashar al-Assad, as we know, fled from Syria. Israel immediately attacked them. They yesterday or so, they exploded an arms depot. They're apparently setting up military bases there, temporary or not, we're not sure. So what's your reading about what's going on in those two countries?
I think there's an element to this which is also some sort of compensation for the failure in Gaza. But also I do think that Israel is, I'll be careful with this because we don't know what they're really planning for the long term. What we've seen in Lebanon basically is Israel beat Hezbollah. Hezbollah was forced to essentially to surrender under conditions that for a very, very long time it said that it wouldn't. That they said we will only stop the war, we'll only stop fighting Israel, shooting at Israel, if there's a ceasefire in Gaza. And they were forced to accept a ceasefire agreement without one in Gaza, before the one in Gaza. And now we're in kind of this limbo situation where as part of that ceasefire, Israel was supposed to pull out gradually and for the Lebanese army to take over basically those places where Hezbollah once was, and now the Israeli army is in control. But that process has been taking much longer than planned. So while formally on a ceasefire, Israel is still inside of Lebanon and still legitimately, in terms of how the ceasefire agreement was phrased, is attacking Hezbollah fighters while not being attacked itself. So there's this kind of very strange limbo situation. And in Syria, of course, the fall of Assad has led to this campaign you mentioned of taking over Syrian land. The framing from the Israeli side is, we're doing this to defend ourselves. I have to admit, like, I'm battling to understand what the end game there is. I don't think that even Netanyahu is like planning on kind of long-term control of these new territories. I don't think they'll build settlements inside of the recently occupied territories in Syria, unlike the old occupied territories of the Golan Heights. I don't think that's the plan, but what is the plan is not very clear beyond kind of this show of force, beyond basically telling the new regime there before even understanding who they are, what they're planning, what their attitudes towards Israel and the greater Middle East are, without even allowing them any kind of benefit of the doubt or trying to talk to them, just saying, we're your enemy, we're going to take more territories from you and kind of bomb your weapons depots. We'll make sure that you're our enemy, which I don't think is a smart move at all. But that has been the policy.
Right. We keep hearing, and this is sort of a theme, that we don't know the end game, and it sounds to us like they don't know the end game. So you've said again that, what's the goal here? So let's just move to Iran, because there was animosity between Israel and Iran. And then again, Gidon Levy was saying that because of the ceasefire, that it reduced the options, that the plan to attack Iraq was kind of off the table because of that. What's your reading of that?
Well, again, this is the kind of place where it's really hard to predict, and I wish I had better answers. But again, I would say it's all up to Trump. I mean, we could be, going into a world where Trump says, you have to stop fighting in Gaza, you have to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, but I'll give you these ominous statements on what we'll do with Gaza in the long run. Does he or does he not mean them is a different question, but he has been making those statements that have been seen as a victory for Netanyahu internally. So, regardless of what actually happens to Palestinians, this is a huge threat for Palestinians. But the way he's been kind of boosting Netanyahu's popularity and the popularity of the far right in Israel through these statements is unquestionable. So you have that, and then does Iran calculate into that in a way of saying, you'll get Iran, you can attack Iran, while I'm kind of pushing you into a ceasefire and normalization with Saudi Arabia? Or does he say, no, like, I'm trying to create a new Middle East without wars. You don't get to attack Iran. I'll give you other things, but we just don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Netanyahu would dare go into a war with Iran without US backing. Like that's not an option, I think.
Right. Thank you for that. So I want to shift to the role of the media, Haggai, and I think I do have slides on that. So can you just hold on 1 second?
Sure.
So we know that the Western media has been absent, not just Israeli media has been absent on this, on reporting on what's going on for Gaza, so that the Israelis don't know what's going on, apparently haven't seen many images. The US and the Western media has also been hiding what's going on. So this is from Northern Solomon. Dave Zirin, who's a journalist for The Nation magazine, same thing. The US media failed to tell the story. And then Gidon Levy says, they don't show these things in Gaza. The press is failing to cover the war. 972 magazine, on the other hand, has had these investigative reports that really revealed important and terrible things going on, such as the Lavender program. This was recently about the connection between the Israeli military and Microsoft, which should interest us here living in the United States. And then this was really timely. This was like this past week. 972 published this, that the damage of Trump's Gaza plan has already been done. So this is really quite remarkable that 972 has been covering this. I'm going to stop there and ask you to share your thoughts on the role of the media in portraying what's going on in Gaza and the Middle East in general.
Sure. So I mean, it's much simpler to answer the question if we zoom in on the Israeli media, because the Israeli media has been absolutely horrific. There's just no shades there. We can talk about Haaretz as one outlet that started, catching up with what needs to be done and said a few months into the war. The first few months they completely lost their bearings and were 100% in support of the war, silencing any voices of criticism, not telling people what was happening in Gaza. And even to this day, I think while they have been doing much, much better, it's really interesting to see what are the things they're willing to discuss and what they're avoiding. So a good example of this, I recently heard from my colleague Yuval Avraham, who wrote those investigations about Microsoft and AI. He said it's interesting how Haaretz has been publishing investigations on war crimes committed in Gaza, but all of them are focused on the ground forces. So the soldiers that are there, who they're shooting, what houses they're destroying, and so on. While the vast majority of casualties and of destruction in Gaza is done by the Air Force and the Intelligence Corps. Those are the main players of war crimes, but they also happen to be kind of a core constituency of the left and of Haaretz readership, whereas kind of ground forces tend to be a little kind of middle to lower or lower classes, not Haaretz readers. So it's easier to kind of point the finger and say, look at what those, people on the ground are doing, and avoiding looking at the people in the air and in the kind of tech bases and stuff. So that's the gap there. I think the rest of the Israeli media has just completely ignored everything that's been happening to Palestinians. So you would turn on the news for 16 months now, and basically every day, literally every day, on all channels, in all newspapers, you'd have, October the 7th. It's every day is October the 7th. And from both a kind of political and a journalistic perspective, it does make sense for a community that's gone through such trauma as we have done with October the 7th, to take time to deal with that, to tell the stories. That makes sense. But when it becomes the only story of the day, that and soldiers that are being killed in the wars in Lebanon and Gaza, that really skews people understanding and kind of reinforces the trauma. And Naomi Klein wrote a beautiful piece about this in The Guardian, kind of talking about how memories being used to sustain trauma, to re-traumatize on a regular basis as a tool to justify what we're doing to Palestinians. And when that comes with absolutely nothing of showing what's happening in Gaza, just the immense levels, the unprecedented levels of killing and of destruction over there, that creates a deeply, deeply twisted kind of mirror world where Israelis are just seized in this mentality of, we're only victims and we're not doing anything wrong. Whatever it is we're doing, it must be self-defense, because look at what they have been doing to us. I think with the global media, it's a little bit more diverse. Like, you do have outlets that have been doing a lot of excellent reporting from Gaza. We know from our own reporting how many stories we've told that have been picked up by mainstream media outlets internationally. We're talking in the hundreds. Our stories alone have appeared in hundreds of mainstream media outlets around the world, multiple times. CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times, they've picked up our stories so many times. And that's just our stories, and they've been doing their own stories, that some of which have really been good. They've also, tried to defend Israel, I think, more than one should. But it's definitely more complicated, and you hear a little bit more diversity of voices in Western media. I do think that something we're always seeing is either a complete lack or a sidelining, or just significantly fewer Palestinian voices in relation to Jewish Israeli voices or Jewish voices in the US. And that's always been a gap. I think it's not as bad as it was in the 2009 war, for example, in Gaza. Things have gotten better over time, but still we're seeing this huge gap, and the need to listen to Palestinians on the ground and to believe Palestinians on the ground, I think, is something that is very, very apparent if you look at Western media.
That's a great point about believing the Palestinian voices. At the same time, I mean, can you just mention like 190 or 200 Palestinian journalists in Gaza who were killed? So
Yeah,
it's kind of
exactly. I
hard to
mean,
hear from Gaza when you kill them.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and thank you for bringing that up. I mean, that reality, I think one of Israel's wisest moves in its own kind of interest in a way, the Israeli government's interest, has been this just media blockade of Gaza. I mean, for 16 months now, no foreign journalist has entered the Gaza Strip. There was one CNN reporter who was able to kind of sneak in for like 2 hours, but that's it. And the combination of preventing journalists from going in and then saying, all Palestinian journalists can't be believed because they're Palestinians, because Hamas is pressuring them, because they work for Hamas, which some of them do, but definitely not all of them. So kind of creating this, it's kind of like Schrodinger's, Gaza Strip, where you don't really know what's happening there. You get all these reports. Maybe there's a genocide, maybe there isn't. We need someone to open the box and see what happens there, but we won't let anyone open the box. So we will kind of linger in this situation of uncertainty. We can say, yeah, people are saying that terrible things are happening there, but we don't really know. And at the same time, as you mentioned, just killing so many Palestinian journalists, that combination has allowed some level of deniability for Israel. I think a lot of people that are critical, a lot of people that do listen to Palestinians and see with their own eyes kind of the images coming out of there, and listening to American physicians that went to Gaza and came back with stories. So people who want to know can,
Yeah.
but it does allow for a significant enough portion of amount of people to be able to have this kind of doubt, right? To say, well, you don't really know what's happening there. You can't count on anything coming out of Gaza in terms of reliability. So that allows people that level of deniability to continue in supporting Israel.
Just a tiny mention of, I was
Pardon,
stunned.
pardon me, sorry to interrupt, but
No,
one to
Jeff,
add
this
question.
isn't the time. Can you, Cole, can you? I was stunned to see how many videos were posted on TikTok, videos of destruction in Gaza. And so this idea that there might be a generational difference because the young people who are seeing these things and the older people who aren't, I mean, some older people are on Twitter, got on Twitter, I don't think that's the mainstream people, but just noticing that distinction.
Yeah, and also remembering that all algorithms on all social media platforms
Yes.
are built to show people things that reinforce what they already think and believe. So, you can say, well, but the videos are out there. You can open Twitter, you can open it whatever you want. It's there. But if you're not following the right people, if you're not kind of liking the right,
Yeah.
posts, you'll be kind of shown into a different path where you're only seeing, October 7th, you're only seeing things that reinforce what you believe. So
Yeah, that's a
not
great
helpful
point.
either.
That's a great point. So to the audience, I want to say, I'm going to pose one more question to Haggai, and then we're going to open it for Q&A. So if you want to be thinking about what question you want to ask, and we're going to do that mostly through the chat box. So if you want to think about and sort of compose it, this would be a good time for that. I have one more question for Haggai. I'm going to go here. So let's talk about the future and what's possible. Ilan Pappé has famously said, this is the last phase of Zionism, and the Zionist project is coming to an end. You yourself made this comment in your writing: recognizing Zionism's settler colonial nature shouldn't prevent us from reimagining a collective Jewish existence in this land, or taking seriously the fears that are weaponized to justify Palestinian subjugation. And you might want to unpack that for us. And then this one here, again from 972 magazine, Mahmoud Mushtaha: can Palestinians imagine a future with Israelis after this war? And the answer is kind of no. He said, my grandfather remembers neighborly relations with Jews before 1948. For Palestinians today, a prospect seems nearly impossible. So what would you say? Let's see. what would you say? What's your sense of what's possible for a peaceful and secure future for both Israelis and Jewish Israelis and Palestinians?
I think in politics is the realm of making things possible even when they seem impossible. And I do think that it is possible to find a peaceful solution. It's not something that, the basic principles have not changed. I mean, so much has changed in our reality, in the pain and the suffering, mostly of Palestinians, but also of Jewish Israelis. So much has changed in that sense, and the turn to the far right, and like all of that. But the basic principles of how to solve this, kind of recognizing that there are two peoples here, both have, equal attachment and connection to the entire land. Both are not going anywhere, and both deserve equality, justice, liberation, security, and peace. I mean, that's pretty basic. And if you recognize that, there are multiple solutions of how this can come about. And yes, obviously, the more pain, the more suffering, the more difficult it is. But you can look at other places where, there are Jews living in Berlin. I mean, and quite successfully and enjoying their lives there. You have, Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, people. I was just in Bosnia, where people who used to massacre, their neighbors are back to being friends, and the same can be said about Rwanda. And like there are so many places where it seemed inconceivable that the levels of violence and pain and hatred were such that it could never be overcome. But there's something
I thought
about
you can't hear me.
right?
Sorry.
But there's something about
What's your say? Yeah.
peace.
Wait a second. Cole, can you mute everyone? Sorry, Haggai.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was despite who it was, but I'll mute everyone.
Yeah, so I just think that the point when people choose peace and it's on, Israel first and foremost to come and say we're willing to end subjugation of Palestinians, we're willing to allow Palestinian liberation. I mean, it's on all of us to push in that direction. It's on Israel to go there and then to reach an agreement with Palestinians. It could happen. I'm afraid right now it doesn't seem like it's going that way. But also, I do want us to remember that in Israeli history, after the Six-Day War in 1967, it seemed like, Israel is just invincible. And the kind of atmosphere in Israel at the time was, we can beat any nation any day, and we don't have to give territories back and nothing like it. And then 73 happened, the Yom Kippur War, and suddenly like this huge trauma of actually they can, wipe us out. Maybe we just survived with a chance this time, forcing Israel immediately to go into this state of hyper-nationalism and hyper-militarism. But right after that, to peace talks with Egypt and actually signing the first peace agreement with an Arab nation, which has held till this day. I think similarly, you can look at the first Intifada, where at the time it was like, look at those Palestinian terrorists, but very quickly after, suddenly it's like, oh, we can negotiate with the PLO, these horrible, horrible terrorists that just a moment before were the worst enemy that we can ever talk to. Now they're shaking hands, on the lawn in the White House and getting Nobel Peace Prizes. So we have a history of a response to violence that kind of forces Israel at first to go into this, what we're seeing now, this hyper-nationalist, hyper-militarized state. But then that runs its course, and people are like, well, we can't fight forever. We can't afford to keep dying and killing, and the economical costs, the financial costs, and the international isolation we're suffering. There's a point where it just feels futile. Like we've done everything we can with military solutions. Maybe there are other solutions out there. We're not there yet in terms of Israeli public opinion, but maybe we're, just around the corner from that. I'm not very optimistic. I'm not trying to kind of sell too hopeful a vision, but it is something that could happen. We've seen happen in the past.
Inshallah. All right, so let's open this up. Is Cole, can you find Julie? Oh, there you are. Let's see, I'll add you. There you are. Can you unmute, Julie? Okay, super. So folks, could you type your questions in chat so that we can pose them to Haggai? Julie, do you see one in chat?
I have to reopen the chat.
Okay.
I'll ask the one that I see. What's going to happen, Haggai, what's going to happen to Palestinians who refuse to leave Gaza based on Trump's comment that they will be removed to some other place?
Well, again, like we have no idea this whole kind of madness of Trump's announcement. We have no idea what that looks like. If he's serious, like, we've heard from some of his staff that he basically was making it up as he went along in the press conference. Like, they don't know what he's talking about. So is this an actual plan? Is this something he'll forget about the day after? Is this like a way to pressure Saudi Arabia to settle for something that is less than a Palestinian state? But they can say, oh, we prevented the ethnic cleansing of Gaza by normalizing relations with Israel. We just don't know. Yeah.
Thank you. Julie,
There,
choose one of those, not
I-
both.
I don't see any questions in here. I don't know where you're.
Oh, I see.
There's one chip from Jeffrey who's had
Yeah.
his hand up for a while now.
Why hasn't the killing of Palestinians taken its toll on Israeli morale? Not sure. Can you make sense of that question, Haggai?
I mean,
I can make sense of it if you want me to.
Only if it, I don't think so. Let's see what Haggai might like to say to that.
Well, I'm not sure about the Nazi comparison and whether that's precise. I don't think we've seen kind of Nazi massacre of Israel of Jews, winding down because of lack of morale. I don't think that's something I've ever heard of. And I don't know of actually many wars where that actually happened. So in Israel, you definitely have some people who are starting to feel bad about things they've done. Part of the reason we've been able to publish these investigations that we've been publishing is because people are saying, wait, we've done terrible, terrible things. And we need to talk to someone about it, right? Like the whole Breaking the Silence organization has been founded on this. They recently shared some information about the people coming to them to testify. It's even people from the religious Zionism. So these are people on kind of the far right that are feeling bad about things they've done. So we are definitely seeing more and more people starting to talk about what they've done and feeling remorse for it. I wouldn't say that it's at the point of kind of threatening morale. What's more threatening to morale? It's like hostages still being there, in Gaza, Hamas not being beaten. Those are the things that you hear much more soldiers being frustrated with. Kind of what's the point if we're not achieving anything that we wanted?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
What did you mean? No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh,
Julie.
hi, Abby. Yeah, I think one thing is people are direct messaging, and if you could put your questions in the chat to everyone. But I do have a couple questions here. What is your assessment of the long-term viability of Israel as a Jewish state in its present configuration?
Well, I think one thing we've seen the past 16 months is that just from a military perspective, Israel has kind of been vindicated in a sense, right? And Netanyahu and his vision of saying, like, we can fight everyone off and survive, for now, has proven successful, right? October 7th was this huge catastrophe. But after that, we've decimated Gaza, we've destroyed the south of Lebanon, we've collapsed the regime or supported the collapse of the regime in Syria. We've basically brought most of Iran's proxies and allies in the region to their knees. That's a pretty impressive record. I think it shows that there's no viable military threat to Israel right now or in the foreseeable future. This is the lesson that countries around will probably learn, that it's not realistic to try and destroy Israel militarily. What are the odds of a Jewish Israel? And when I say Jewish Israel, I do mean specifically in the current configuration where its Jewish nature means the subjugation of Palestinians. I don't think that's viable as a very long-term plan. I think, at some point, the internal conflicts around that with Palestinians, first and foremost, will just continue being an issue that Israelis have to contend with. What that looks like and how much longer Israel can go on subjugating Palestinians, it could be a long time. I said before, maybe we're just around the corner from something great, but also we could, and definitely under Trump, quite likely be seeing at least 4 more years, if not much more than that, of Israel continuing to do whatever it wants with impunity.
Julie, why don't you take another one?
Okay. So there's so many here. Okay, what will motivate Israel to really seek peace when they're so much more powerful than the Palestinians?
That's just true. I mean, nothing, essentially. I mean, that's been the main problem until October 7th. The vast majority of Israelis, and I'm talking about like 85% of Jewish Israelis, did not think that there was an issue to even think about with Palestinians, right? I mean, you had a lot of people who thought we should double down on annexation, but the vast majority of Israelis were like, this is no longer an issue. This has been solved. We've figured out a way of managing the conflict, which is a translation of we're so much more powerful. We've brought them to their knees, and they will never, pose a threat to us. So why do we need to think about this problem? There's no problem to be solved. Since October 7th, I think that has changed drastically. So right now, a vast majority of Jewish Israelis are saying this question of Palestinians is something we need to contend with. And the more pressure there is on Israel, the more people understand that they have to solve this problem. But as long as Israel can sustain international relations and diplomatic support, and military support, all of that from the West, mostly from the US, there really is not enough of a motivation to change things in any significant way. Which is why, the answer has to be changing the power imbalance between Israel and Palestinians and supporting Palestinians and supporting the call for BDS and for more pressure on Israel.
Thank you.
Someone's asking if you can repeat what you said earlier about Haaretz having a bias in favor of the Israeli Air Force. I think you were saying that the readers were more likely to identify, or the articles that you all wrote about Lavender and Microsoft and the technology. Can you repeat that for somebody wanted to, ask you to?
Yeah, there's this kind of stratification of positions in the Israeli army. And when I say army, it's not like in the US sense. The army here is like it's including the Air Force, the Navy, and everyone, where there are certain positions that are more associated with the elites and the kind of upper middle class, and intelligence, tech, computers, Air Force are some of those. And these are the people that were kind of in the front lines of the pro-democracy demonstrations that we saw up until October 7th. These are some of the people that are kind of now with the hostages protests. They're all very much anti-Netanyahu, And they're very much, kind of the people that Haaretz is aiming for, the Haaretz readership. And we've seen so much less criticism of them. And this is, very classic of the Israeli Zionist left, where you would find these examples of violence perpetrated by the ground forces, usually people from lower classes, and say, look at how bad they are. And by so doing, kind of absolving the much, much, much bigger crimes committed by people from within this camp of the elites, and the Air Force and so on.
Julie?
Here's a question about the history of the Nakba, and is it obscured in Israel? Is it studied at all, known?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think up until I think about it was 13 years ago, I think, when the Nakba law was passed, basically forbidding commemoration of the Nakba, forbidding any institution funded by the state from talking about the Nakba. Up until that point, very few people heard the term or were talking about it. And ironically, that kind of opened up a discussion about the Nakba that has become much more mainstream since. I think, unfortunately, it's not a very sophisticated conversation, so you don't really hear details about what the Nakba really is. You know it's something bad that happened to Palestinians in 48, but then the translation of that to Israeli politics has looked like over the past 5 years, and we actually wrote a piece about this, I think 2 years ago. We were saying Israel is set for a second Nakba because we've just kind of collected a bunch of statements from Israeli politicians saying we will commit a second Nakba. So the same people that were passing a bill saying don't talk about the Nakba, there was never a Nakba, are now saying we will commit another one. And then we're seeing what's happening in Gaza, which is basically another Nakba like that. So it's kind of there, and it isn't. It's a word that everyone knows. It's in politics, but the actual meaning of what happened, how the Israeli first kind of militias, and then when the state was founded, the first days of the Israeli army, how they went about deporting people and how they destroyed their villages so they don't come back. That is the kind of information that not many people are regularly exposed to.
Haggai, I'm sorry if I didn't understand the connection you were making between they passed a bill, the anti-Nakba, like you can't mention it, and then you said, and those were the people who said let's do another one. What is the connection between those, or what's the motivation
I
behind
mean, someone just wrote it's like critical race theory. Yeah, I mean, it becomes such an issue that they're fighting because they're saying, talking about the Nakba is, a manifestation of the kind of radical left, the progressives. They're bringing in this critical discourse. It's not true. It's just trying to kind of slander Israel. We need to prevent them from talking about this and undermine the moral basis of this state, right? That's kind of the narrative. They pass it, and once they start talking about it and start hunting down, oh, this, theater has screened a film about the Nakba. Do we punish them? How do we? Suddenly, like everything is Nakba, 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 and everybody's talking about Nakba in a way that they weren't before. So that has really kind of been a driver for the conversation. And then gradually, and this is not immediately after, this is like 2011, I think, the bill was passed. And after a few years, suddenly in the past 2 or 3 years, we're starting people saying, we will commit another Nakba, we will fight Palestinians, we will banish them from the West Bank and Gaza. And they don't recognize the irony of being the same people that have passed a bill saying you can't talk, there was never a Nakba and you can't talk about it. The same people are now saying, we'll do another one. It's an irony that it's seen from the critical circles. They're not seeing it.
Thank you. Julie, there's one from Sylvia about the environment.
Yeah, I was just going to read that one actually. It says, what about the environmental impact on Gaza? And how livable will Gaza be in the future, given the incredible environmental damage?
It's terrible. I think we don't yet know all the facts. We've been actually involved in an attempt to kind of gather soil and water samples and examine them and compare them to pre-war samples. But it's been incredibly hard to find labs to do the work inside of Gaza and get anything out of Gaza is really hard as well. So it's definitely an issue. But right now, I mean, even before the questions of environment and land and water, the state of infrastructure, the lack of houses, the lack of electricity, of water pumps, even if the water is bad, like you can't even pump it. There's just nothing in terms of basic sanitary. The in that sense, when Trump says people can't live there, he's right. Like he doesn't say why they can't live there. He doesn't say the solution is, well, we need to prioritize rebuilding for them. But he's right that the levels of destruction are do make the place unlivable right now.
Thank you, Haggai. So Joseph is asking, how do you cope emotionally? This is difficult.
Well, it's definitely been the worst year of my life in that sense. I mean, it's really, really hard. It's breaking up relationships. It's I mean, living through something like this. And in the beginning, it was just the actual terror and fear for myself and my family. Like we didn't know what was happening the first, couple of weeks. It felt like, our lives are at risk, and my kids, I've been so traumatized by the rocket attack. So there was a very kind of personal element to this of the threat. But then as time went by and the more kind of direct threat to us decreased, the more it became an issue of living in a society that just not just condones, right, supports, that is actively involved in horrific war crimes and crimes against humanity, and celebrates it, and while at the same time sometimes denying it, but really being all behind the troops and all of that. It's really hard to live with. I mean, my brother, I mentioned Berlin before. My brother left the country. He moved to Berlin. He's not coming back. So it's affecting my family and it's affecting my friends, and I don't know. I don't have a good answer for how to cope with this in the long run. Just the work we've been doing has been meaningful, and it has been resonating globally, and it feels important, and that's the one thing that really, really keeps me going in that sense. Just feeling like I'm doing something that matters.
I had told you, Shir Hever said that tens of thousands of Israelis have left, about 26,000 bankrupt companies, seems to have really damaged the economy and mostly the relationships between people.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Julie, I wouldn't take the whole one, but just take part of that one. The BDS one.
About BDS, yeah, so important. But let's see how I can. I'm going to take the last part of it and let's see if I can get. Could you speak directly to how communities can make a difference to pressure Israel with these concerns in mind, and these concerns being not wanting to support BDS for fear of alienating other Jewish people in the community, and also for fear of being identified as anti-Semitic?
I really understand that. I think finding Jewish allies or Jewish Israeli allies is a good way to push back against that. I mean, part of how we think of our role, being critical of the war or supporting BDS or anything like that, is being a tool for people abroad, for people to be able to say, look, there are Jewish Israelis in Israel right now, and they're against the war, and they support BDS, and and they say that it's not anti-Semitic. So, is it kind of fail-proof of being called anti-Semitic. It's not. But you know, we're seeing if we have the kind of conversation we've been having here about just how futile all other avenues have been, how the Palestinians don't have almost any leverage, how Israel doesn't have a reason to end their subjugation, how the US president and everyone basically around the world, while there's so many criticism on the level of the people, governments are continuously supporting Israel. And that reality means that you could either just let Israel continue doing what it's doing or try and play a role. And this is the one real way of playing a role in pushing back and creating some sort of pressure and holding Israel to the same level of accountability that you would expect of other nations. There's this kind of trend of saying Israel is being singled out for the worse. But it's not. It's really being uplifted in ways. I mean, other regimes that commit the war crimes that Israel is committing are, being sanctioned by governments in the West. And Israel, I think, is the one government that is doing these things and is not paying any price for it, but just continues getting, weapons shipments from the US. So just talking about that, I hope would help. But I know it's a struggle and it's really difficult.
And just so you know, we continuously are working on trying to end the supply of weapons and armaments to Israel. It's one of our key goals. We haven't been successful yet, but we're going to keep trying.
It's really important.
Anyone else have a last question for Haggai?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Why not have one state for both peoples with equal rights? Gideon Levy said this two-state solution was never even born. But why not have one state, for all, if Israelis want to live in Palestine and Palestinians want to live in Palestine, why not have one state with equal rights for both peoples?
But when you say why not, I mean, from whose perspective are you asking?
From the Israeli and the Palestinian perspective. Why not get together and have one state for both peoples?
I mean, I can say why most Jewish Israelis would object to that, because they want a Jewish state, a state that would be A, with Jewish nature, B, with the Jewish majority, and C, guarantee the safety of Jews. That's how most Jewish Israelis think of what the state should be. Which is
why
why
not have a Semitic state? Semitic. Both peoples are Semitic people. The Arabs, the Palestinians are
Okay,
Semitic people.
let's let him answer. Yeah.
it's just not how people think about this. I mean, nobody goes around saying we're all Semites. I mean, it's just not the politics of this place, the thinking of this place.
Well, I mean,
I wish it were,
anti-Semitism is
but-
used in the US all the time against Palestinians who are, protesting, the Israeli occupation. They call them anti-Semites, and actually Palestinians are Semitic. They cannot be anti-Semites. They speak Arabic. Who are the Semites? Those who speak Hebrew, Arabic.
Thank you for your question. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to say, I mean, the notion, and I see there's the question, aren't many Israelis atheists rather than Jewish? Even people who don't believe in religion would say that they're Jewish in terms of their nationality. I mean, there's hardly anyone who would really think about an Israeli nationality. It's a Jewish nationality. That's how people perceive of themselves. And so you have people who are completely secular to the point of atheist, but they're still a part of the Jewish people, and being Jewish means a lot to them. And they're thinking, this place, there's Jews and there's Arabs or Palestinians, and we are fighting each other, and we need to protect ourselves from them because they want to throw us to the sea. Like, that's how people see it. And of course, things like October the 7th, things like people in Hamas saying, we want to do that again and again and again, that reinforces kind of that siege mentality of people saying, we're in threat, we need to protect ourselves from them. We can't give them a state, and even more so, we can't share a state with them for them to be free to go around massacring us. I think that's what, again, it's not my position, but if you're asking why Israelis would oppose to that, this is why Israelis would oppose to that.
Julie, I think we'll take one last one. Julie, do you want to ask Colleen's question?
Sure. So Colleen asked here, let's see, I don't see
Doesn't
That
quite make sense, yeah.
direct. Did that go direct?
Oh, does it factor, so it's not, I'm not quite clear. Does it factor in with the conditions of released hostages and prisoners that there was starvation all over Gaza and bombing probably led to being held underground? But what we saw, Haggai, when those women soldiers were released, they looked like they were in pretty good condition.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this argument, but I do think we need to deal with the fact that all the previous people released, both in the first round, but also now over the past couple of weeks, everyone seemed healthy, and it's this round of men that did not, and also their captors, the people who were next to them, did not seem like they've been starved. So I do think, and we've heard this from testimonies from hostages that have come back, that younger men, have been treated much, much worse in captivity. So while yes, Israel has definitely made it much, much harder for hostages, and some hostages were killed in Israeli bombings. We just published an investigation around hostages that were killed by gas, toxic fumes. From bombings released inside of the tunnels, killing Hamas people and hostages. So definitely a lot of hostages paid the price of Israel's assault. But I don't think there was a situation where, from what we know so far, that hostages were not getting any food just because no one had food. Hamas did have much more access to food than regular civilians in Gaza throughout the war.
Mm-hmm. And just by comparison, Haggai, when we saw the pictures of the Palestinian prisoners who were released today, they did not look very good, very healthy.
Yeah, and this has been true of all releases of Palestinian prisoners for through the deal, but also people that were released before. I have a friend that came out, lost 20 kilos in prison. Just someone from the West Bank. They held him essentially without charge and released after a few months. But through those months, he was just regularly, routinely tortured and not given almost any food. So these are horrific stories we keep on hearing from Palestinian prisoners as well.
Yeah. Here's a question here, Julie. I don't think it's what we would promote, but do you want to read that one from Peter?
Could the Israeli Constitution, if there is one, be amended to guarantee that Jews would always stay in control of the majority of the government?
In control or in the majority of the government?
Or in the majority, no matter how many Palestinians might be in Israel as citizens?
I mean, we don't have a constitution per se. We have kind of a set of what's called basic laws. Those laws currently state that Israel is a Jewish and democratic state, and any party that wishes to challenge its nature as both Jewish and democratic cannot run for elections. So that means that Palestinian parties in Knesset right now, and we're talking about Palestinian citizens of Israel, they have to kind of commit to accepting the Jewish nature of the state if they want to be allowed to participate in the democratic process, if you want to call it that. So I'm not sure if it exactly answers the question, but it kind of sort of does, I think.
Yeah. Haggai, thank you so much. Don't go yet. I want to give people an opportunity to thank you. So Julie, thank you. I'm going to remove the spotlight from ourselves, Haggai.
Okay.
And then I want to let everyone, let's see, it's unmuted, right? So could you all express your thanks in whatever way you want with your hands? You can call it out, put it in the chat, just to thank him for his excellent presentation and his taking such patience with all of our questions. Could you please thank him?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you all. Keep up the good work. I'm sure it's not easy these days with Trump. Like we have our problems with him, but you
Mhm.
definitely have yours. It's not going to be an easy time for us the coming few years. So, keep up the good fight.
Yes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
11 תודות, חגי.
Thanks, Abby.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you, Julie.